Ladies and gentlemen, friends, since we are going to have to close sharp on time, I thought we'll get started. It's a great joy to have such a stellar presence today. I am particularly happy to see Kudeshia and Kudeshia. We have reckoned with Medha. Thank you for bringing Janesh along. And the fact of the matter is, normally this is a researcher seminar, but today I thought we'll bring it up a little, and to see Subhasis from political science, who's also from Rochester, gives me the hope that we will also use this slot for proper interdisciplinary conversations. Now, ISAS, as the members of the Institute know, and as our guests don't know yet, has now discovered its 3 Ds. You know, in Singapore, you have to have 3 Ds, 4 Cs, and so on. The 3 Ds are development, democracy, and diplomacy. Development is what it's really about, and development, of course, is going from here to there, from poverty to prosperity, from hierarchy to equality, from feudalism to the modern age, from patriarchy to whatever. I wouldn't say matriarchy. What that is, I still don't know. But how does one reach there? For that, you need politics within systems and politics between systems. Politics within systems is how stakeholders engage with one another. Of course, Fukuyama gave it a bad name, but many of us believe that that's what democracy is really about, how stakeholders engage with one another. And diplomacy is how political systems engage with one another. This is how to avoid war and how to get from here to there in terms of negotiation. I am working on principal negotiation, so that's some theoretical approach that we are bringing to this triad. So democracy, diplomacy, development, and these are very, very abstract ideas. The opportunity that this conversation gives us and others that we are having is to nail these very abstract concepts to concrete realities. How do we see the entanglement of many different conceptual transitions from here to there in specific cases? This is why when I had a conversation with Manjusha and she suggested this topic, I was very pleased. And I've always believed that the conversation should start as an intramural conversation within a discipline. And when they still have a problem and run out of arguments, they should get out of the discipline into interdisciplinarity. Otherwise, if you become interdisciplinary too soon, it can become a low-level equilibrium trap. You don't make a concept work until you still have a problem but no more instruments of battle. So that's why I thought if a sociologist speaks, we should have a sociologist to chair and take the other person to task. And that is how we approach Riyaz and history. Now, as everything has a shadow, well, if you don't see it because you have not looked carefully enough, everything has a history. Political scientists, sociologists believe the world was made for our amusement. The world is a tabula rasa. We can do whatever we want on it. But that's not how it is. The present is very strongly influenced by the past. That's called path dependency. And I am discovering the beauty of path dependency at a very late stage because I'm working with Ganesh for my book on the Ministry of Home Affairs. It's a history book. And I'm so pleased we were able to get Prof. Medha Kudeshia to open the conversation. So that's the order. I'll now hand over the proceedings to Professor Riyaz Hassan, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Professor Mitra. It's a pleasure to welcome my colleagues from my old Department of Sociology. Delighted to see you, and thank you very much for the seminar. Let me just make a few comments about the context. The relationship between, I mean, as you know, capitalism requires 3 elements of production: labor, capital, and raw material. And the relationship between the state and capitalism is one of the perennial debates in sociology and economics. Now, it's something like, the debate is essentially structured something like this. Capitalism needs labor, but does not want to produce labor and therefore it needs the state. The state is primarily the institution, the political structure to which the labor is produced and reproduced. And through a historical agreement with capitalism, in 100 years ago, the company tax was introduced. And then later on, the income tax. And basically, these two taxes provided a revenue to the state to actually participate, actually to play a decisive role in production and reproduction of labor force, which was needed for capitalist development. But this has created all kinds of difficulties, because there's a tendency over a period of time for the privatization of profit, which the capital wants to keep, and the socialization of collective means of consumption. These are services which we need in order to reproduce labor. And I think today's debate really is, today's paper actually falls into that general framework, that how the tension between the privatization of profit and the socialization of collective means of consumption, as they call in sociology, which are essentially social services which are required for reproduction of labor force. Now, Dr. Manjusha Nair is going to take us through her research journey to the capitalist development in the Indian capital, moving to Africa. And essentially what capital moves in order to maximize its profit. And it maximizes profit by basically exploiting the labor or making a state to actually take over the external costs. Now, I'm not sure exactly how the story is going to unfold, but I pass it on to Manjusha in order to tell us how this is, how the story is actually going to, what she has discovered the story is going to unfold or unfolding. Manjusha has a PhD from Rutgers Universities in sociology. She has been very active in research. She has published in very distinct, very reputable journals like Historical Sociology, International Labor. I won't take too much of your time, but I'm sure that if you have time, please do read her biographical note, and I will leave it to her to actually lead us to the journey that she is going to explain to us through her research. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Hassan, for the introduction, and Professor Mitra for allowing me the opportunity to present. And I'm very glad to see everyone, especially my FAS colleagues. So it's an honor to be here and to be here at ISIS and to be presenting here. So I'm going to talk about my new research project, which is on Indian capital in Africa. So I'll just talk a little bit about how this project came about. So my previous research, my dissertation research was actually on labor and capital and state in central India. So I am a political sociologist who normally looks at labor. So at that moment itself, I was interested in some of the companies in central India, that was the state of Chhattisgarh, which were actually going global. So many of them were moving to Australia, Indonesia, and all parts of Africa. So I had quite an interest in that at that point of time. But then you finish your PhD, you finish your book manuscript and do other things. So I never thought of actually pursuing that. But then 1.5 years back, a conference was advertised at Cornell University. It is going to be on South-South capital flows. The good thing was that it actually gave the presenters, potential presenters, around 1 year to finish the empirical research, write the paper, and present. So it was quite a serendipitous moment for me. So I applied for an MOE Tier 1 grant, which happened. So, and last June, I just took off to South Africa, which was quite easy because there is a direct Singapore Airlines flight to Johannesburg. So that is how this started. So this is going to be, this presentation is going to be my first field visit in June 2015. So this is the stage because I see that this can go in my next visits and more fieldwork can go in all directions. There are so many interesting things happening out there. So I would like feedback on that as well. So the research question that I started with. How are South-South capital flows different from North-South capital flows? So why? are they different? Because I mean, there is an argument. There is a lot of investment, global investment, going from Asia to Africa, and a lot from within Africa. You can see from countries that are in the semi-periphery, like South Africa, to other countries in Africa, and a lot in trade, but also in foreign direct investment. So there is this argument that I mean, this is going to be the new kind of expansion of capital. I mean, you can look at the BRICS partnership, and you can look at this India, Brazil, South Africa initiative. So all the dialogues and discourses are about how South-South partnership can be different from North-South partnership. So you can, this IBSA, it has started an anti-poverty trust, in which, I mean, all these countries, India, Brazil, and South Africa, are mutually cooperating. The BRICS partnership, among many initiatives, they have started a BRICS Development Bank, which is supposed to replace organizations like International Monetary Fund, where they feel that the southern countries do not probably have a voice or agency. So, I mean, there are a lot of interesting factors that are connecting all these countries. I mean, most of them are very strong. I mean, post-colonial legacies and histories which are connecting them, and they were very active in third world internationalism, starting with a Bandung conference, and they have anti-colonial struggles to talk about, which are connecting them. And the fact is that none of them are actually hegemons. They don't have the relationship of hegemonic power and subordinate, or they, in other words, they don't have that core periphery relationship that we talk about. So probably the idea is that they are better partners for development than the conventional North-South partnership. Okay, and this kind of idea is propagated not only by the countries that are, or the states that are participating in that, but also World Bank and I mean, many think tanks as well. So, so this is what Mahatma Gandhi said in 1947. It seems that he believed, I mean, this is possible, right? The commerce between India and Africa will be of ideas and services, not of manufactured goods against raw materials after the fashion of Western exploiters. So he was actually talking to West African soldiers whom we met in India in 1946. So I mean, this is the main argument, right? The commerce and as well investment is going to be more emancipatory, and which can help the development potentials on those regions than the North-South capital flows. Okay, so but then there is this another argument which is probably from the side of world system theorists, which look at all these new capital flows and new commercial flows as something that is happening because of the expansion of the transnational capitalist class, which have formed alliances with the state. So how is it going to be any different from any other kind of capitalism? Capitalism has this internal logic to expand and make profit, and they actually put forward a lot of evidences. For instance, what is happening in Africa with regard to China and India is that they are interested in investing in extractive resources such as crude oil, I mean petroleum, coal, platinum, gold, okay, so, and copper, okay, so, and the markets are being flooded with consumer goods from Asia, so which might mean that many of the local businesses are going out of, I mean, business, and many local people are losing their jobs. Okay, so this is, I mean, how different is from, I mean, the Western exploiters, what they do in the southern countries. And also, all these countries, I mean, all this extractive production, that by nature itself is quite predatory. I mean, you have to displace people out of their land, right? And the fact that why they look for those extractive resources in those places, it's because it's cheaply, it can be cheaply mined, and it can be cheaply taken, right? So so and many of these countries like China has a history of human rights violation, and if you look at the cases where Chinese businesses are operating, the conditions are the same. I mean, they try to employ informal labor, and they make associations with the states which are problematic. So this kind of world systems argument, this kind of expansion of capital is no different from the North-South. It cannot be. I mean, by logic, it cannot be different from North-South capital. So, their argument is that, okay, from BRICS partnership, what can come out is that the people who are suffering from this expansion can join forces together, start social movements, which I also saw, I mean, the evidence of that happening. So, how is it different? So, based on this field visit, what I find is that it's not, the South-South partnership and this expansion of Southern capital to the South that I saw was not actually the way North-South capital expanded, because none of them are hegemons, right? So if you are not a hegemon, you cannot dictate or manage or regulate the institutions where you're going. And that puts you at a disadvantage, and that actually affects your inability to prosper as capital as well as offer development. So this is an argument which I developed yesterday. So, but I think, that is what I am seeing based on this, field research in South Africa. So, through this paper, I am trying to address a gap in literature. There is actually a lot of Chinese scholars are working on Chinese capital in Africa. While I was in Johannesburg, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, they were organizing a conference on world political economy Congress, and they are taking photographs and all that. Indian interest, there is a lot in diasporic studies and maybe strategic partnerships or in economic literature or in connected histories and all that, but no systematic sociological analysis of what is happening, what Indian capital is doing in South Africa. So I'm trying to fill this gap through this study. So what I studied was an Indian coal mining company in South Africa. So I'm trying to be not name the company, though I'm still thinking whether to name the company or not. Because if I name the company, it will be easy to identify all the people whom I talk to in the company. But the name might slip because I'm always, used to talking in terms of the company's name. So, before that, to talk about South Africa. South Africa is a very good choice because these are countries that are quite equal, right? Historical connections. Starting from trade, indentured labor, slavery, and then British colonial history and the British colonial legacies which are characterizing the institutions now. And also, then other kind of connections, right? Mahatma Gandhi started his, freedom struggle from there, and all the ideals of Indian freedom struggle were quite popular in the anti-apartheid movement. And India was the first country to impose an embargo on South Africa during the apartheid regime. So, and both these countries are now obstinate democracies despite all the multi-ethnic issues as well as other kind of development issues like poverty, health-related problems, inequality, corruption, and all that. So I think, and the fact that they are very comparable and very similar and low, both of them are middle-income countries in the semi-periphery. So I thought this was like a good choice. And they have started economic cooperation since South Africa's transition to democracy in 1994. So India has been considered as South Africa's closest ally in the Asian continent. This was what the South African Minister for Human Settlement told during her visit to Delhi. So this kind of partnership is acknowledged by the two economies, and they are both members of BRICS Association. bilateral trade between these countries have grown tremendously. And there has been investment from India to South Africa as well as from South Africa to India. From South Africa to India, which I'm tracing, is mainly in breweries. And the Diamond Company, De Beers, is looking for investment there, and in airport development and in banking. While Indian investment has been in extractive industries, but also in more and more in manufacturing. So Tata is active in automobile and also in telecommunications. So Airtel has purchased a lot of mobile networks, not only, all over in sub-Saharan Africa. And in real estate, agro-processing, apparel, everything is there. What I did was that I approached the company. All my previous research has been through communities. Like if you look at labor, you talk to labor communities, and you don't normally approach the companies because that might be look suspicious to the workers you are talking to. But here I started with the company. So I went to the company head office in Johannesburg, and I met the corporate communications persons who happened to be in the place where the colliery is located the following week. So she helped me talk to many of the staff. So the colliery is actually located 400 kilometers from Johannesburg in this province called Mpumalanga, which is a new province, with a new name, which is just post-1994. So I spent around 20 days in this colliery, and I lived in the town that was next to that. So if you travel in South Africa, you'll find that the rural areas are quite beautiful, and this town is an Afrikaner town, so it has, it's quite beautiful and full, the entire area is quite well developed. A lot of farms with, every possible thing cultivated. So in this town, it has, in the apartheid regime, been like all places, divided. So there is the white part of the town, quite beautiful. The colliery headquarters is there, and the managers live there. I also live there. And then there is a black part, which was initially called the location. And then there are separate residential areas for the colored people and the Indians. So, almost all of South Africa was divided like that. So you see these kind of divisions, still valid, though you can see there are a lot of incursion. So it is happening that because of the increase in crime, a lot of white people are leaving the area. And I also heard from my colleague who is from China that the white farms are being taken over by the Chinese. So this is the town. And this colliery is probably 20 to 25 kilometers from the town. And so this was not a colliery which started producing in 2008. It actually bought an old colliery that was, not functioning well. So it started the operations in 2008. So there was not actually much displacement of land. But there were mining communities that have tribal communities that have claim to the land, and those were 2 mining communities next to the colliery, and probably around 9 mining communities in the region. Okay, so so my fieldwork was like talking to employees, which included Indian staff, South African, white South African staff, and black South African staff, Indian South African staff, which was only 1. And so since I went through the company, they prevented me from talking to the workers. While I was there, in those 20 days, there were at least 2 strikes going on, which I could see. But they wouldn't tell me what was the reason for the strike. Or they say that because they feel cold inside the mines or something like that. And we couldn't also actually contact with mine workers outside. I thought it would be quite a vibrant mine labor community looking at the history of mine workers in South Africa, but this was not. And also the fact that most of these extractive industries are capital intensive. So I went inside the mines, and you can see it's mainly done through machines. These huge machines which are cutting coal, but you actually need labor to manage those machines. And So the local communities, we were not supposed to talk to the local communities because there was a lot of contention going on. But I mean, I was helped by a Zulu speaking, so most of the population speaks Zulu. So my interpreter, I had a research assistant who also acted as the interpreter who was Zulu speaking. So, so what we would do is we will always find people waiting for ride on the roadside, either to go to the mines or I mean to go somewhere. So we would give them lift in the cars and talk to them. And in the last few days, we just went inside the community and talked to a lot of them, which this company came to know, and then they stopped cooperating with us. So this is so it was. So what I'm trying to say that was the fieldwork was done in quite a precarious way. I mean, quite unlike how you do it in India, right? India, you're not scared to talk to anyone, or no one actually can prevent you from talking to anyone else. That is not the case here. So now a little bit about post-apartheid South Africa. So here I'm pointing to some of the institutions that are in place in this region. So South Africa in 1994 is said to have had a negotiated deal. I mean, if you look at the writings in South Africa by the African National Congress from 1945, you see a Marxist bent. There's a lot of talk of socialism. I mean, even the language of means of production and all that. So that is where it's there. I mean, most of the academics are Marxists, especially sociologists whom I met with. But this transition to democracy, that was a period when neoliberalism was in place all over the world. So in South Africa, the African National Congress couldn't actually talk about land redistribution or any kind of serious land reform or making the taking over the businesses from the white people. So it couldn't actually engage in any of that. I mean, and it's called a negotiated deal because I mean the transition was through negotiations. There was no revolution or there was no coup. So it has a peaceful transition. So it had to pay a price for the peaceful transition. So it had to revert on all those radical strategies that they had. It had planned for in 1945 and all that. So, so what to do with? So it had this dilemma, right? I mean, kind of the dilemma that India had at the time of independence as well. So, what to do with this? How do we empower black people then if we are not cutting off? It's said that all the capital in South Africa was owned by 6 industrial conglomerates owned by white. I mean, not even the Afrikaner population, the old British white population. And while the Afrikaner population controlled most of the land. So if you look at South African history, all black people have been traditionally taken away from their lands and put in reservations or put in some place so that the land could be transformed to agricultural lands, okay, or mines or something like that. So there is this very, obvious history of dispossession, right? And the new state has come to power, which has promised to address this dispossession. So how do we do that if we have a negotiated deal with white capital, right? So what I find is that one way in which the South African state did this was by transferring the responsibility to capital itself. So if you look at the mining charter of South Africa, it says that if there is a mining company which has some mining rights over some land, it has to actually have 26% ownership by the black people. It's called the Broad-Based Black Empowerment Program. And this company has to buy products from vendors where 26% of ownership is with the black community. And it has to help mining communities which are in a 40-kilometer radius in, around the mines. Okay, so, and employment equity. Among the employees, so much has to be, so many people have to be black, the rest white and all that. So a lot of responsibility or, which is beyond what we talk about as corporate social responsibility. These are like very, strict social, state regulations which have an impact, and you can be penalized, and it actually gives all these corporations a scorecard. and if you do not do well in the scorecard, you will be affected. So so this is what happened, and this has had an impact on what is happening to this company. So, okay, this is the picture of the colliery. So you can see it's an underground colliery which takes anthracite coal. So it cannot be used in power building. It can only be used in metallurgy, steel and metallurgy and all that. So this, I mean, so it's actually, where is the highlight or yeah, the red button. Yeah, so this mountain, this is actually below, this is the mine shaft. So this is actually the, coal region. So the name of the company is there, but you can actually see, I have just blocked it, but you can see the Indian and South African flag, right? It's as if it's a, equal partnership. And if you go into this company, you see, the picture of the chairman everywhere, and who is wearing flag of, pin of Indian flag, getting awards from the president and the prime minister, or, he's posed with the national flag. So Indian nation is everywhere in this corporation, though it is a strictly private company, unlike most Chinese companies. So, what the Indian chief operating officer told me was that this company is not making any profits because of the huge overhead costs. So, so what are the limits to why this huge overhead cost? So one is that it has not been able to do any kind of flexible production, which means it can't actually get vendors cheaply, and it can't actually employ cheap labor. Okay, so what happens is that the labor, while I was there was a lot of trouble going on from the Department of Labor, because what this company did was that, like in India, they try to employ workers through contractors, and most of the employees were from outside the area. We tried to talk to someone on the phone, and my research assistant said that this mine worker probably was Zimbabwean, the way he spoke Zulu. So they were actually employing a lot of outside people. So this was against the law, the equity law of the company. And the Indian human resource manager of Indian origin, whom they hired right then, she told me that this company is going to get into trouble quite a lot because of not following these equity laws. And then, how much time do we have? 10 minutes? Okay. Five, okay. 5 minutes. Okay, and again, the labor unions are there everywhere in South Africa. There were 2 important labor unions in this company, and as I saw that, we saw them striking twice. So though we couldn't talk to them, which means that, so I'm not going to go into detail. There was limits to flexible regime. And what this corporate communication person said is that, Indian management is aggressive, while what is expected in South Africa is a kind of nurturing relationship. Like once they wanted to, the management found that one of the contractors was not actually, creating economic hardships to the company. So they just went ahead and removed and put another contractor without consulting with the employees who were working for the contractor, or without any negotiation, which was a problem in South Africa. And this is what she meant by aggressiveness, right? Among Indian expats, there is a yes sir mentality. Never ever have I seen an Indian worker that says no to an Indian manager. And this was, so if you pick this management from India and give them South African workforce who questions everything, which I understood from a research assistant as well. So it's quite frustrating. So it's a, Indian and South African thing. So, so I will talk about, and if, more than labor, what I found was that what was important in studying this company was its relation with the surrounding communities. There were 9 communities, and this is actually the cold mountain, and it was winter, so that's why it doesn't look green, but these are all farms. And there are a lot of communities which are either working in white farms or have their own cattle and all. But these communities are really poor. So I talked to a lot of young people who were metric pass but couldn't continue education because they have to go to the cities, and there was absolutely no employment. Because I mean, they didn't engage in any farming, or they didn't know any farming. Even if they didn't get any land, even if they got land, that is the current problem in South Africa. People don't know how to farm. Right, so these were people. So you will see them sitting outside the taverns, and I mean sitting somewhere and talking, and this place is quite contentious because in 2009 there was a lot. It's called rebellion against service delivery. There are a lot of uprisings in this region against the local municipality for a lack of service delivery. So this is already quite a contentious kind of community. So this company went into this community, and what the company feels is that this community wants to steal from them, right? That is the kind of approach, because in India, I mean, I didn't see anything like a mining charter where community development is talked about in India. So it's not in the habitus of the company that it has to, talk to the community. This is what they said. We are minting money, so they are pouncing upon the mines. Okay, and on the other hand, it was actually a nice, financial officer of the mines who was trying to give a very objective account. And this is what the youth was telling. You cannot come and start a business in an area and not involve its people. So they found the Indian people stingy, and they said that they just, take their mines and go away from there. So they actually started, they said that they started a lot of community development projects like chicken projects, teaching them licensing or helping them to start, vending businesses and all that. But none of them were successful, and the communications person said that it is because the communities were fighting. But what the communities wanted were things like schools, bridges, employment in the mines, which they were not getting. So, and this is what the management told. What is happening in this homestead is that there is a homestead, and they are thinking that if the mining company takes away some land for one community development project, they might get some money for resettlement if they actually make a traditional house. So they have made a traditional house in between, but we went and talked to these people, but we couldn't actually ask whether you made this, because I found that in almost all places of South Africa, this kind of traditional hut, has been built. So, but the company thinks it is so that it can steal from the company. Well, the people think, yeah. So, okay, so a lot of contention, and also that is one reason why the company didn't want us to talk to them. And there were instances when students were throwing stones at the company vans, blockading the company and all that. So I'll just rush to the, there's a comparison with Chhattisgarh, which I have, where I looked at the same company engaged in coal mining. So if you have any questions, I can ask. So as concluding statement, so what I find, my bigger argument about this company, Indian capital or the Indian state not being a hegemon in this new area. So I could compare with like historical cases like the British capital or the Dutch capital. I could compare with China, but it seems I've read Chinese studies on Chinese capital in Tanzania and Zambia, where the Chinese capitalists have not been able to enforce flexible labor regimes. It seems that the same kind of phenomenon is reproducing elsewhere. And I could also look at comparisons of capital flows from these places to the peripheries, like Congo or some other place, which could be considered in the periphery of the world economy. So I would just stop here and say thank you. So I saw an Indian peacock, which is in one of the farms picking up garbage, so which I thought is quite good. So
very good. Very good. Thank you very much. Now, I think, if I understood you correctly, please correct me. Your research puzzle is that the south-to-south capital flow somehow are different, or maybe different from the north-south capital flows. And they are different in the sense that they are more labor-friendly, environment-friendly, and they're not so much concerned about the profit. But I suppose your conclusion is basically that really, from what I understand, there is really not much difference. So are you trying to argue that capital flows from south to south are you still maintaining that capital flow from the evidence you have said, the tension, the lack of communication with the communities, the struggle with the labor market, and bringing management which is primarily not really attuned to the local environment, and basically environmental degradation which is going on. So is the puzzle the south to south capital flows are different from north-south? Is that the puzzle? And what is your what is the answer?
Yes, Manisha, Medha will have to go.
Okay,
So maybe
yeah.
I thought you could hold on to that question. She'll make some comments, and then of course we'll all join in. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to be very brief. That was very interesting, Manusha, and you're very well placed because of the comparison with being able to make the comparison with Chhattisgarh, and also because of the comparison with China. And if you look at Indian capital in Africa, it's really following. I mean, India is following the Chinese model. So lots of embassies, trade financing, regional summits, this whole India, South Africa, CEO forum where Ratan Tata is very active, summits with African business. I think there have been 3 starting from 2008. My main comment is really that if you're looking at Indian capital, I think you need to locate what kind of conglomerate it is. Because Indian capital is of various kinds, at least in terms of Africa and South Africa particularly. So there are the big players going back to 1960. So the Birlas got into paper and engineering goods in the 60s. I mean, GD was approached by various African governments, and then BM Birla entered. So that's, they're the old players. And the Tatas, of course, are into various things from steel to coffee, etc., telecom. Mahindra and Mahindra, now very active. So that is one level, I think, of conglomerates. Then there is, I think, what you're talking about, which my sense is it's a Marwadi firm, perhaps. I mean, there is that level. There are a number of Marwadi players who are kind of new entries, smaller, new entrants just trying to get into this kind of market. Then there is, of course, Indians in agriculture. So Kasturi Global, which sends 1 million stalks of cut flowers to Europe every day from the African market. And then there are the state players. So I think it's important to locate this kind of firm, because I mean, after all, Aditya Birla is big into mining in Australia, but is not entering South Africa. Now getting into insurance. So I think the puzzle might be solved if you look. I mean, of course, South is interesting, and that's very important too. But it's also about what kind of conglomerate this is, and what its practices are, which we talk about in the abstract, what its practices have been, and therefore engagement with local communities and how that is being played out. But maybe that will come later once you go back to the company and then look at it. But of course, the larger question is also very relevant. But I think the micro is very important.
It would be interesting to see whether these Indian companies in the origin have any different motivation. I presume capital moves to maximize its profit. I presume they are not really moving in for humanitarian, as an extension of Medicine Sans Frontier. But obviously, it would be interesting to see whether there's a difference, whether there are differences. But let me, Dr. Chaudhary, and then you can
thank you very much. Excellent presentation. In the same vein, I mean, you mentioned center periphery at one stage. I mean, obviously borrowing from Independencia School in Literature. Now, when you talk of this company, this thing, I mean, someone like, say, Samir Amin or Andre Gunde Frank or Furtado would say that this is the center in the periphery, which is no different from the center in the center. You see, center in the periphery, which has this exploitative relationship.
Yes.
Okay. and people like Kuntala Lahiri, who's worked on women and all that sort of thing, would sort of, follow that. This thing. But that is one comment. So this south-south, north-south, these kind of divisions, it's taken from the chairs, this thing, it's very political. I served for a year in, I was special advisor to Secretary General UNCTAD. UNCTAD, as you know, is a bit of
Yes.
a left of centerish UN organization. We were interested naturally in Africa. Now, Mapulanga, this town that you talk of, I think it's also called Emalahleni in Zulu, which is the place of coal, dangerous place. I mean, there are 6,000 colliery vacated mines in that region. You probably would have seen the sieve fires yourself.
Yeah.
You see, it has elevated carbon dioxide, it has sulfur dioxide, it has heavy metals in the ground, it has acid water and spewing all the time. So this environmental hazard is tremendous. So any company going there is not going for reasons other than purely capitalist intentions, and is no different as the chairman from the Southern company. So my point is twofold. One is, when you begin a title of or any thesis or whatever with the South-South kind of thing, you'll have to define your terms very carefully. I mean, what is South? What makes South different from North, number one. And secondly, about this place, Mapulanga, I mean, I think I know the place.
It's a province.
It's a province. It's a province, and in the Zulus call it a Malanga, the place of coal. But there, I think they're trying to utilize 3.75 billion. There's a World Bank loan, and it's been hugely criticized. So continuing mining activity in that region is being very heavily criticized by human rights this thing all over the world, and I'm sure it is also the same as
Why don't you respond to them, and then we can take the next round of questions.
So I'll start with the last comment. I mean, province that you are talking about is Hoteng, maybe that is of the gold. Mpumalanga is the rising sun. Hoteng is, the capital of which is Johannesburg. So probably.
Yeah, but this is the land of coal. I know it is Mapulanga.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, to talk about this company, well, this is a so this is not actually the Tata and the Birla. So this is not an established conglomerate from the pre-neoliberal India, but it has been this corporation has been existing since 1960s, but it has gathered most of its power after 1991. I mean, you can see that in Chhattisgarh. I mean, it has even investment in the Bhilai steel plant, which was the first public sector company. So this company has really, enhanced itself and established itself, and now it has mining all over Africa, like even in places that I never heard of before. And it has mining in Indonesia, and it has mining in Australia. So this company has, grown, I don't know how I can talk about the company without saying. So I like to find out, because otherwise I could show how this company was expanded. Any idea who that? Initial?
Well, then we can guess at that.
No, why are you not naming? I mean, if we're going to it's
Name and shame.
serious.
Name and shame, yeah.
Not necessarily shame.
It's the Jindal. Jindal Corporation,
My
yeah.
God. They're doing the same in Odisha.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and in Arunachal Pradesh.
Yes.
So, so yeah, but it would be interesting to look at, that could be another comparison. What kind of company, or how would the Tatas be different, right? Or how would the Ranbaxy, which is in manufacturing, could be different, yeah. And, yeah.
Okay, are you done with this?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll take go ahead. Who are the other people? 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and Professor Mitra.
Thank you, Manjusha. I think this project is fantastic and very promising. And I, in fact, have a lot of questions in my mind, but probably, I will have separate time with you. My, biggest problem for me right now, based on your narrative, is based on the contradictory the feature between your argument, which is based on macroeconomic like perspective, and your micro economic like findings. Yeah, my question is very similar to Professor Hassan's, observation. If you really find that there is no employment, taking place in the village, and the nature of like this Indian management in the company is quite aggressive. I mean, what rational makes you, like argue this is not really, different from North-South capital flows, right? I mean, I have, my own research project for doctoral thesis was looking at, in fact, north-south capital flows by looking at two different like states in India and four different foreign companies, and also well, until I came to the conclusion that in fact Korean like capital in Indian companies in India is not very extractive. I mean, I looked at a lot of like different things, like for example, like entire pattern of capital flows between two countries, or negotiation process between state, foreign capital, and domestic labor. Like in fact, many of like things in your narratives are not really like explaining what you really want to say. So maybe in your like future like analysis, you may like take all this kind into your mind. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just going to sort of come at it from a political science point of view, and I think the first 2 points that were raised in basic political science, we call this selection bias. You basically picked. So I'm just going to add on one another source of selection bias. I think you've put South-South partnership to a very, very stringent test, because you're looking at mining. Okay, now there's a long literature in political science, or even in sociology, which tells us that there's no company in the world that has done well in terms of labor relations in mining zones. These are natural resources, right? So, I think you've heard about the resource curse argument, right? I mean, typically companies do screw up when it comes to natural resources. I mean, they basically, so the labor relations are going to be contentious. I mean, I would like to know what happens in Indonesia with Jindal. Are they welcome there, or do the people love them there? Probably not. I mean, the relationship between natural resources and amicable labor relations is always very sort of typically when a place is rich in natural resources, you're going to see a lot of contentious labor relations and so on. So in that sense, it seems to me that this is another. I would like to see you work this out in another sector. I would have liked to see this in a non-coal sector, a non-natural resource sector, how these relationships work out. The other question is about Chinese in Africa. So yes, there is this. So you're saying they're following the Chinese model, but you just said something about the Chinese buying up firms and so on, right? So the Chinese do this in many ways, right? So if they lose in one area, they'll find a way in another area. Why are these, why is this Jindal, why are they unable to sort of work out these other avenues of dominance? You did mention Chinese were buying up firms, farmland and so on. So what prevents Indians from, and by the way, they're buying up farmlands everywhere, buying up universities everywhere, so football clubs and so on. So what prevents the Indian capitalists from acting in this fashion? So I'd like to know more about that.
I'm Tandu and then Professor Mitra.
Again, very interesting work, and I look forward to the next steps that evolve out of this. I had a couple of comments on this. When we get to the initial premise where you come into this from, the South-South partnership, and the way you reflected upon the quality and the structure of the partnership, you mentioned that, ideally speaking, in this partnership, none are hegemons, right? Now, of course, I'm not a political scientist. I come from an economic perspective. But what I do understand is that within the South itself, the South is not the same as what it was. When this North-South division first was anointed, the South has come a long way. And let's say, for example, China. Looked at vis-a-vis China, the rest of the South, many components of the South might actually no longer yield to this particular assumption that you are making in the first place. It may not be a hegemon-subject relationship, but it could well be a fairly unbalanced relationship. We see that happening in various forums. We see that in the AIIB, we see that in various other China-led initiatives, even within the BRICS. There's a clear assumption that China is ahead of the rest of the South. And even when it comes to, let's say, an association like between India and Mozambique, and coal is a sector where we do see other parts of Africa coming into this. So I'm not entirely sure about that assumption in terms of it being an entirely, non-hegemon quality-like relationship when we look at the South-South. When it comes to the labor issue, you mentioned about the Indian management having a difficulty with the local staff in terms of they not being very sort of obliging. This is where I think the Indian management is actually different from the Chinese model, because the Chinese have been taking their own labor. So the question of their not coming up with non-compliance doesn't arise because it's their own people. And that has actually created a very different kind of antagonism within the African communities, because firstly it's extractive, secondly it's not local livelihood creating. So maybe that's a point which you'd like to keep in mind. And third, I'd come back to the very important point which I think Medha mentioned. I think the nature of the enterprise is extremely important in learning the dynamics of this capital flow, because if, say, for example, had this been an investment taken by the Coal India Limited, and the Coal India Limited has interests in Africa and is a major state-owned enterprise from India, would it have acted in the manner in which you notice this enterprise to be acting in a variety of industrial behavioral ways? Thank you, but very interesting nonetheless. Thank you.
And now the final word.
Manjusha, thank you very much for exactly the kind of conversation I would like to encourage at ISAS. Your paper has a little something for everyone here. And as a writer in residence, I think you'll keep the ninth floor engaged in long, long conversations. Thank you for that. I would join my colleagues from political science with 3 specific questions. There is a political science category called cheap talk. And you say something, but you don't quite mean it. Assuming you will have a broader sample, that's responding to Suhasis's critique, we could build up enough of a database to talk about South in a representative way. Even if you did that, the question then for me would be, is there anything new in South-South, you call it partnership in the conversation, on the paper, it's partnership sometimes and economic relationship sometimes. Is there anything new compared to the North-South? Is capitalism capitalism, or does it have a human face, as Gandhi would have liked it to? So it is just cheap talk. Second, what is this new creature called corporate social responsibility? Is it just an euphemism, or has that found a nifty way of rising above the contradiction of capital and labor and find a new method which will achieve both, that it will exploit the surplus but give something back? Is it a new theoretical construction or just more cheap talk? The third question is a question from Max Weber. Such a thing as Southern capital should not be possible because the Jindals are not Protestants. No Protestant ethic, no capitalism. That's the canon. So are we finding here a new mutation, a new genre of Asian capitalism or non-white capitalism? Is it something that we should be looking at in Weberian terms?
Well, thank you very much. You want to take on all this question, you will be here for a whole day, but otherwise maybe you have
probably
you have the last word.
Few comments.
You have the last word.
So I think to answer to Professor Hassan, Sojin's and Subhashish comments, so what I mean to say is that, I don't assume that capital is any different, but I do see a difference between the North-South and South-South capital. That is the bigger argument, which will be based on a much more representative sample, which I could actually do in the coming 3 years. Which is that, the level playing field has changed, right? Capital always comes with the state, right? With the, state and soft power and all that. And this also relates to what Amitentu was saying about the unbalance, which is kind of there. But the fact is that it cannot, capital cannot dictate the way the North-South capital used to dictate. I mean, despite this, difference in balance or hierarchies and all that. So, I mean, about Chinese capital, I know that in the Zambian copper mines, they try to do this, contract labor, and wherever labor unions are strong, they all have, most of the African countries have very strong trade union history. So those kind of institutions, the Chinese capital also cannot manage, right? So this is very different from, African mining, in the early 1900s, or even before that, where the British capital, the way they used to do. And even if you look at the Marikana platinum miners strike, which was a big issue in Africa around, South Africa, around 37 people were killed. So you can see a lot more of a historical relation. It's not the way contemporary mining capital operates. So I think there is a fundamental difference, the way the South capital or the, operates. So the argument which I will develop, in due time. The lack of being a hegemon, it actually affects the ability to, of capital to realize itself, right? To realize its profits. So then. So I think probably that's what is, going to be new about, this. I think it's that the field has changed. It's not the same field in which North-South capital used to. But again, still I have to formulate it well. I don't think this is to do with corporate social responsibility, because what I see in Chhattisgarh is that Jindal Corporation, they have a lot of schools. And the school that they have in Raigad district, they have the picture of that school in the Pumalanga colliery. It is there. But when I talk to people in Chhattisgarh, the schools, they cannot send the local kids to schools because they are so expensive. Only the rich farmers or middle class people from the nearby towns, only they can. So that is how, so corporate social responsibility, at the field, it looks quite different. On the other hand, what has happened in Chhattisgarh is that, the company took away the pond they had. There has not been water supply. They are still dependent on private tanks to bring water. And here it's not even about corporate social responsibility, right? These are rather more institutionalized regulations that I'm talking about, which is making it difficult. Yeah, I think those are all the comments that I remember.
I think we, do we have, I think you go ahead. You may have, if you want to make a quick comment.
I'm going to take on the role of the devil's advocate, right? I'm coming from a reductionist background. If you look at third world investment elsewhere in the South, and you just to construct a simple taxonomy, you look at the consumer manufacturers, the white good manufacturers from China hire, or in telecom Xiaomi and a whole bunch of others, or from India, TCS, the mining groups, the consumer goods. They spread out all over the world now, primarily in the developing world. The ones that have operations spanning both the developed and the developing world, the model isn't terribly different. You're seeking the same bottom line, right? As to the question that you're posing initially, the point about a hegemon, I'm not sure if it was an inference or a hypothesis that was being posed. The question revolves around unequal relationships. Am I correct in assuming that? Again, given the operating model, I'm wondering how you would be able to elicit any information. The one theme that you could possibly draw upon is the diasporic relation. Particularly if you look at, for instance, other investments in South Africa, Petrobras has been reasonably successful in Mozambique, and that's through the common linguistic heritage, in Portuguese. Likewise, there are a number of Spanish companies that have invested in Latin America, right? It's again the linguistic and other cultural linkages that have helped them to expand into the country and effectively engage with the neighborhood. The bottom line out here is, I'm wondering if you think it's meaningful to see how the not too insignificant Indian diaspora in South Africa could be drawn upon as a resource to have more effective engagement. The other point that may perhaps muddy the issue is South Africa is not in the happiest state right now. I mean, the ANC is badly split up itself. Zuma's having a very difficult time with the young Malema. They're practically splitting up.
Well, I think
There's a considerable amount of industrial unrest. So I'm just wondering how you feel that's going to muddy up the entire picture and sort of detract from efforts to draw some generalized conclusions.
Well, thank you very much. I think I know there's another meeting waiting for all of us. So I just wanted to say, not far away where you studied, there's Appalachian Mountains. I saw the North capital doing worse things to each other. Just go to Appalachian, just go to Kentucky, and you will see the miles after miles of miles environmental degradation. These mining people came, extracted, and moved away. But I think it's an important topic. It raises important issues, and I think refinement of research puzzle, I hope, would help you to focus and also relate to the general debates which have been raised. Thank you very much, and thank you for your coming.
Did you like it?
Yes, of course. Yeah.